Right. So welcome everybody to our first Bible study, Zoom Bible study. You are all, of course, safely at home where you may cough and sneeze and do whatever you want to do and not worry about bothering anybody else. It'd be great if we were all in person together. That's so much more fun, but this is better than nothing for sure. And it's good to see your faces. Oh, we got Amy coming in here and Mike. Excellent.
And I'll show you.
Mike, good to see you. Welcome.
Hey, Father John. Nice to meet you finally.
Yes, indeed.
Who is that guy? I used to know him.
Gallery.
Oh.
Hey, Nels.
Hey, Nels.
Hi, Mike. It's good to see you.
I got
Hey,
sunglasses. You have to find,
I know Mike.
see if it says gallery up there somewhere.
It's been a while.
Hey, there's Ann.
Whoop.
All right, well, let's begin with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
With thy
Also with you.
spirit.
Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting Father, we thank you so much for your grace and your mercy on us. Thank you for the chance to meet together even virtually like this and to learn more about your word. We ask your blessing on it, a blessing on our conversations and on our thinking and talking, that we might grow closer to you. We ask these things in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Yay, more and more people coming in. Welcome. Hey, welcome. All right, hi everybody. So we're going to be doing Psalm 95 today. Psalm 95. And I will be sharing my screen. And I went through today and tried to make all the words on this presentation much bigger, because I know that when you do a shared screen on Zoom, it makes everything kind of look smaller. So I tried to make the words bigger. I wasn't able to do it everywhere. If you see something that you want me to zoom in on, let me know and I can do that and make it bigger. Of course, it's great to have conversation. It's hard on Zoom to have conversations because we're all connected virtually. But if you have something you'd like to say, just pipe up and say something. If you can keep yourself muted if there's noise around you. I'm down in my basement and sometimes the dryer's going and that thing's pretty loud, but it's not going right now, so I'm okay. But you can, if you want to send me a chat message, you can say, I have a question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and say, Father Thorpe, I have a question, or something like that. And I will try to give you guys a chance to talk also about what we're going through. So I will share screen now. And this is a software which some of you may be familiar with. It's called Prezi, zooming presentation, and it's a great way to display information. So Psalm 95, first, before we get too far into the Psalms, we need to talk a little bit about the language in which they take place, which is, of course, ancient Hebrew, right? I will admit right up front that I am not the best of Hebrew scholars. I know a little bit, but I do know a lot about languages, and some of you know a lot about languages too. And you'll know that not all kinds of writing work the same, right? So there are parts of the Bible that are meant to be more like history, parts of the Bible that are letters from Paul to one of the churches or something like that, and the parts of the Bible that are poetry. And of course, the Psalms are poetry. And the key thing with Hebrew poetry is that it really doesn't work unless you use your imagination. So all the Psalms that we're going to be talking about in this study are really inviting you to imagine yourself into these situations. And they're giving you images, word pictures, and they're trying to set up emotional scenarios for you to imagine yourself into. And not just your mental imagination, but also your emotional imagination, which we call empathy, right? They're trying to get you to use your empathy and your imagination to put yourself in that situation and feel what it feels like to be where the author is and to think about God. And not all the parts of the Bible work this way. Obviously, there are parts of the Bible that are just supposed to, giving us information about God, parts that are more sort of doctrinally straightforward. But the Psalms really don't work unless you use your imagination. So I'll be showing you a lot of pictures as part of this, and hopefully there'll be pictures that can help evoke your imagination. But you might have a better way to imagine this, or a better word picture or image. Use that and help yourself understand what's going on. In fact, as I was thinking about this today, at least for the first few verses of this psalm, the best image that popped into my head was marching band. Was marching band. Anybody do marching band in high school or college? Wave a hand at me if you did.
Yep.
Yeah. I only did marching band for 1 year in high school. I was a football player, so I couldn't do both football and band. But I was a good marcher, and they wanted me to march, so they ended up having me come to all the practices early in the morning and then march in the contest, but not for the games. So I didn't get to do much of the fun part. But I had to go to all the practices. But marching band, you get called out of the classroom, and all the band people are called out together. And then they all go together and get their uniforms from their lockers, and then they all go, and for just a few minutes in the school there, all the bathrooms are filled with band people putting on their uniforms, and then they all go together out to the field, and that's where they accomplish the task of praising somebody else, essentially praising the football team, who hopefully is worthy of their praise if they're doing well, right? Not all football teams live up to the praise that's offered by the band. But
200, just him.
that's kind of the situation that's going on with Psalm 95. We'll get into more of that as we go. But some more about Hebrew poetry. Whenever it's time to use our imagination, you'll see the little thought bubble that'll pop up like this, and that'll be a chance for us to imagine. You can imagine, of course, anywhere as we're going through this, whatever you want. And then we'll think about the emotion that's supposed to go with each imaginative scene. So you'll see these little icons pop up multiple times, and all those are supposed to key into our imaginations and then into our hearts. So one thing about Hebrew words is they have these kind of chains of meaning. And here's what I mean. They'll start with something, a very concrete thing, and then from there, you can tell the ancient mind is thinking about an item, and then from there it's thinking about an action that you can do with the item. And then from there it's thinking about some sort of idea, an abstract idea that goes along with that item. And then that becomes a symbol or something you can use in philosophy or spirituality. So it has these kind of chains that go down. And here's an example. Hebrew has, the roots of Hebrew words have 3 letters, usually. Occasionally, of course, the words are longer. You can take two, 3-letter words and put them together and put another one in. But mostly the roots of the words have 3 letters. So you may be familiar with the word shalom. Anyone heard that word before?
Yep.
Shalom. Anyone know what it means?
I mean, kind of peace to
Exactly.
you, or okay.
Peace or goodness or wholeness. It's got a whole range of meanings, but peace is sort of the central one. But originally, the word shalom meant basket. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. See the basket? This is a shalom. This is a full basket. Doesn't that look like a great thing? A wonderful, wouldn't you love to have someone deliver this to your house while you were at home for COVID? It means a full basket. That's the concrete thing that shalom starts with. And then from there, you think about filling a basket. That's the action that connects to the concrete item, right? Or the artifact, maybe we'll call it. So shalom can also mean, we use it as a verb, to fill something or to be full. And then from there, the meaning goes even further to say fullness or abundance or prosperity or security. right? If you had a full basket like that every day of the week, you would have abundance, you would have nourishment, you'd be prosperous, right? So all these meanings are related to each other. And then finally, that's where we get the idea of peace, health, perfection, friendship, wellness, and safety, because these are more symbolic meanings of a full basket. Here's another way to look at it. Let's go over here. So the root itself is very flexible, these three-letter roots. And the meaning changes depending on which vowels go in between, right? If you put a different vowel at the beginning or a different vowel at the end or a different vowel in between, you get a different word. So again, we'll go to shalom, which means basket or basket full, right? And if you replace those little dashes there with two letters, you do with an A and an O, you get the word shalom, means peace, prosperity, having a full basket. But if you replace those letters differently, maybe you put E and A in there, shalom. It's the same root, has the same basic meaning, basket, but now this is about something that is finished, a basket that has been filled or received. You've got a full basket, right? And here I'm going to go through these kind of quickly just so you can see the full range of meanings with this. Replace those vowels differently and you get shalem, giving someone a full basket. So this is about showing honor to somebody else, maybe a sacrifice of thanksgiving, right? Shalem. And then you can keep going, you can make it shalom, which means requital or retribution. Not quite such a happy word, but it still is related to giving somebody what they deserve, a full basket of retribution in this case. Keep going and you can make it shalom, which means a treaty or an agreement because you have two people exchanging full baskets, right? Exchanging gifts. And make it different. You can even make it shalem, something that is made ready, something that is faultless, already prepared. So look at that. And we've got like 7 different meanings that come off of this one basic word. And so this is kind of how Hebrew develops these ideas. It starts with a thing, and then it becomes an action, and then something more abstract. You guys have any questions or comments about that as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, is this how Hebrew works to this day? I know zero about Hebrew.
It is. The only difference is that ancient Hebrew had no vowels at all. And so all you would see is the SH, the L, and the M. And you would have to guess what sounds went in there. And the only way to tell was by context. So the Hebrew Psalms are actually very difficult in some places to translate because the translator's guessing at what vowels go in there. In modern Hebrew, they've decided that that's just too vague and they need something a little more concrete. So now they have dots that will show what vowel belongs in which place. So if you read a modern Hebrew text, it'll have the Hebrew letters plus little dots underneath them. And that's how they know which vowels belong where. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on? All right, let's get into the psalm itself. And it's fun to look at these little meanings, and you can find if you have a good Strong's Concordance, it will point you to some of these. It'll point you to some of these meanings. So Strong's Concordance is a good place to go. Any kind of Hebrew thesaurus or biblical reference book will usually point you to some of these different shades of meaning. So they should be accessible to you if you want to do a little work. All right, so Psalm 95 begins thusly. O come, let us sing unto Yahweh. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. So let's start with this idea of come, let us sing. Now, the word for come here means to come follow, to come away, to come out. And here's where I was thinking about the marching band, right? Because the the members of the marching band are called out of their classrooms to go put on their costumes or uniforms, and then go out and play in the band. So, and it's the same way with God's people here. They're being called away to follow something. And that shows the nature of this psalm. This psalm was used by people who were traveling to Jerusalem to worship God. Because remember, in the ancient biblical world, you didn't have a church on every street corner. You didn't even have a synagogue on every street corner until the time of Jesus, maybe. But the synagogue system was very late. Actually, in most of the Old Testament, the only way to get to the place to worship God was to travel to Jerusalem. It might be 3 days walk. It might be a week's worth of travel to get there. So it wasn't like you could just show up at church every Sunday and worship God. It was a big deal when you got to go. And so there were lots of rituals involved and songs to sing along the way. Traveling songs, every culture has traveling songs because it just makes travel go better, especially when you're walking, to keep that rhythm and to sing. So this was one of those kind of traveling songs. It was reminding people why they were traveling, where they were going. We're going up to Jerusalem to worship God. Sometimes I say this psalm to myself while I'm on my way to church on a Sunday morning, because that's our version of that, right? And it's great to have this psalm running through my head as I'm driving to remember why I'm traveling, why I'm going where I'm going, and what we're doing when we get there. So come away, follow. And you get the idea of people coming out of every house and sort of joining up with this caravan, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger, and the group of people grows and grows until you have a large caravan of people headed toward Jerusalem and all singing the same songs. Imagine the sense of belonging and community that would come if you're all singing the same songs. And has anyone ever been in a van full of teenagers or a bus full of teenagers when they started singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall? Why do they sing that song? Right? It's not because it's a great song. It's not because it's got clever lyrics, right? It's because the very act of singing binds you together into a single unit, right? And that's what's going on with this song. It's the 99 bottles of beer of the biblical Psalms. So now the second part of this verse, let me zoom out a little bit here. Oh, zoom out, there we go. Come, let us sing unto Yahweh. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. The word noise is an interesting one. We think of noise as a random sound that doesn't really mean anything, right? So it's a bother. We don't like it. But the word noise here actually means voice, or the natural sound that a thing makes. So thumping on a piece of wood makes the sound of wood. It's the voice, the noise of the wood. Animals have their own natural sounds, right? What's the natural sound of a sheep? That's right. What's the natural sound of a cow? Ooh, that's right. See, y'all can make it past kindergarten. That's great. What's the natural sound of God's people?
Hooray!
Yes, exactly. Praising, joyful praise to God. It's making a point. It's kind of referring back to the Ba and the Mu, but it's making a point that this is just a natural thing that God's people do. We come together, we go to worship Him, and we sing along the way. Right? It's just what we do. It's who we are. We have a oneness as we do that. So there's our first verse. Come away, follow. Let's all go. You all come, right? You all come, let us sing unto Yahweh. Let's make a joyful noise and sing together to the rock of our salvation. Rock. That's a word that's often used of God in the Psalms. And it requires a bit of imagination here. We think of rock usually as a stone, like a little river stone, but really it means more more like a cliff face. And the word salvation, we think of it in terms of Jesus and the cross. It is that, but in the Psalms, it means an open place, safety, freedom, right? Have you ever walked into like a field or a meadow and just felt this sense of, lightening of the burdens on you and just happy to be out in nature, that kind of feeling? That's kind of what the word salvation means. So as an image, here's our rock, right? There's a cliff face, there's the rock, and then up there on the top where it's wide open plain, that's where salvation is, right? If you were being chased by bad guys and suddenly instead of being at the bottom of the cliff where the bad guys could get you, now you're up at the top of the cliff and the bad guys can't get you anymore, right? That's what this means, the rock of our salvation. It means God has lifted us up and put us in that place where it's free and open and we could see danger coming from a mile away and get away from it, right? It's salvation. So then, we talked about these things already, this powerful sense of relief. Imagine what it would feel like to be on top of a rock and safe. And here the whole community feels that way together. That's the whole point of the song, right? Bind us all together in this feeling that God is the rock upon which we are safe. So now we go on here, verse 2. Let us come before his face with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. Some of the same words that we just had in verse 1. We still have the word come. We still have joyful noise, right? But actually in Hebrew, these are entirely different words. Sometimes the English translation doesn't do it quite as much justice as we'd like because we wrap a bunch of other words up in our single words, like the word come here. We actually use the word come in a lot of different ways, but it's hard to convey exactly what the Hebrew word is with just that one. So this word come means to go towards something, like come on, let's go, rather than come to me. That makes a difference, right? So now we're all going together, we're all going toward a similar goal. We're projecting ourselves forward. So imagine the same caravan of pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, but now instead of focused on the places they've come from, right? Now they're all focused on where they're going, their goal. They're going to go worship, stand before the face of God. And then the emotion that we're supposed to feel from that is, again, a sense of belonging, not just because we've all been called out of the community, out of our daily lives, but also because we all have the same goal and we're all moving there together. So let us come before his face. That's the goal. With thanksgiving. The word thanksgiving means an open hand. Open hand raised in praise. You see me do this on Sundays when we're doing the Eucharist and I had my hands out in the praying position, the Oran's position. You see Pentecostals do this, when their hands go straight up like that. But that's what this means. This is something that the Hebrews did a lot in their worship. They would raise their hands. The open hand means thanksgiving. Come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. This is a great word, joyful noise, because it means to break something, to shout so loud that you could even cause damage. Right? That's what that word means. Anybody ever been in traffic when the guy pulls up with his rap music on and the bass is so loud that it shakes the very car? Or anyone ever have a neighbor that, had a rock band or something? It was so loud your stuff fell off the walls. Or that's what this means. So you can tell that, again, this is kind of like teenagers in a bus, right? They're getting louder as they go on this trip to Jerusalem. And they're singing together and they're shouting for joy to the rock of their salvation. And they're singing so loud that it's just They don't care. They're going to sing as loud as they possibly can, even if it causes damage, because God is worth it, right? And the word psalm here, we take this one for granted. It's a great word. It means to touch, or to pluck, or to bang on something. It's not the way we think of psalms normally, is it? We think of psalms as something we read in a book, words on a page. The original meaning is hit something, touch something. It's tactile. Right? So the image then is, it starts with the natural world. Think about trees, rocks, grass, animals, right? All creation praising God. We've got several other psalms that talk about creation this way, that you know, the very hills clap their hands. The trees, the voice of the Lord makes the oak trees writhe, right? We've got all this language in the Psalms about creation praising God. And in the Hebrew mind, this is where praise begins. It doesn't begin with people writing texts or guitars, right? It starts with the rocks and the trees and the grass. It starts with the natural world. And then from there, human beings get to be a part of it. We get to bang on something, touch something, strum something that comes from the natural world. Think about, had anyone ever been to an African drum circle, where you sit around in a circle and play African drums? It's really quite an experience. And the rhythm just sort of gets into you, and it's really amazing. And that's the idea, right? That the rhythm of all creation praising God gets into you somehow. And then you start, you can't keep your feet still, so you start dancing, you start drumming, and you start plucking, and you start clapping, and doing all these tactile things with God's creation to make music, to join in the song. And only then after the music is going, do you start to sing words, right? The words come at the end of this chain of meaning rather than at the beginning. So we think of this as a psalm, right? A word in a book. But the way the ancient Hebrews experienced it, it was really more like this, right? This is a psalm. Hands raised in thanksgiving. People joining all creation in the praise of God. So that's just the first two verses. We're going to have a little bit of a shift next. Any thoughts or comments about those two verses before we go on?
Right now.
It's a very emotional sort of experience, this psalm. All right, so here we are. Let's come before his presence with thanksgiving and raise a joyful noise to him with psalms. All right, so again with the image of the marching band doesn't just get together because it likes music. The marching band gets together because it has a reason. It's there to praise the football team, right? Hoping the football team is worthy of its praise. And same thing with this psalm. The first two verses aren't just there for themselves. The people aren't just coming together because we're people and we like to come together. People are coming together to go worship God. It's a very other-focused activity, right? We're focusing on God. And so we've got a shift now from come together, let's all go together, let's sing. We've got to shift to the focus of where our worship is going. Why are we coming together? Who is this God that we're worshiping? So it starts with this description of him. For Yahweh is a great God and a great king over all the gods. The first phrase, Yahweh is a great God, it uses the word El for God. And we could talk a long time about this word. The time the tiniest words mean a lot. This one has had a lot of meaning in the ancient world. In some cultures, El meant a mighty hero, like an epic hero, someone who had the power to get things done, a superhero even. There's Hercules. In ancient Greece, he was an El, he was a mighty one, an epic hero. And this psalm is saying for our God, Yahweh, is kind of like this. He's an epic hero. He takes on the bad guys and wins the victory and saves the good guys. And he's our epic hero. He has the power to get things done. Okay. Sorry, we're getting people in and out. There we go. So yeah, God is the epic hero, and this is I didn't put the imagination and the emotion slide on this one, but you can imagine why it would be a useful thing to think about God as an epic hero. And like all metaphors, it only goes so far, right? It doesn't mean God wears red spangly tights and goes around with a cape, right? That wouldn't make any sense, but it does mean that God rescues us from evil, that God is capable of protecting us when the bad guys come, that God is on our side and helping us when we need it. Right? So like all metaphors, it only goes so far, but it has really usefulness when we imagine ourselves into it. And a great king above all gods. Here they were thinking about Zeus, right? The king of the gods. They had different names for their king of the gods in the Canaanite pantheon, but you get the idea. And I chose Zeus and Hercules at the same time for a reason, because, let's go back. Other cultures had the idea of an epic hero becoming the king of the gods. You see that in Babylonian myth. You see it in Canaanite myth. Sorry, let me get both of them on the picture there. All right. Other cultures had the idea that an epic hero might become a god or become the king of the gods. That's not quite what we have here. What we have is God being both the hero and the king at the same time. Right? So even though it's using ideas that it's borrowing from the pagan religions, it's actually saying something that's very recognizable as Christianity today, that God is our hero who delivers us, and God is also the king over everything, the ruler over all the world, and any other powers that be. Right? And he's both of those things at the same time. There's no development in this verse, right? He used to be the epic hero, and then he became a god. There's none of that. He just is these things. And in the early church, actually, they loved the image of Jesus as an epic hero. Jesus and Hercules even sometimes look the same in early artistic representations. Jesus and Apollo often look the same. Apollo had the role of an epic hero among the gods. Because they loved the idea that Jesus was the hero who conquered Satan and conquered the grave and saved us. So this is still an idea that has a lot of cachet among Christians still today. Yahweh is a great God, a great hero, and a great king above all gods. Here's some more things that he does. In his hand are all the deep places of the earth, and the strength of the hills is his also. When we think about the deep places of the earth, we often think in scientific terms of sea level. Anyone know the lowest place on the planet's crust? Below sea level? It's the Dead Sea in Israel. Death Valley in California is pretty close, but the Dead Sea is the lowest place. That's not the way they were thinking of it, right? Again, they don't have the scientific mindset. It's more of a mythical mindset. And so what they're thinking of is the deep places of the earth. They're thinking about deep holes, places that you can't see into, caves. And if you know anything about the landscape of Israel, maybe some of you guys have been there, there are caves all over the place. My family and I just over the last weekend, we weren't at church because we were traveling we were at Branson, Missouri, and we did a lot of hiking. And there are a bunch of caves down there, all kinds of deep holes in the earth. And in the ancient world, especially Greece and Rome, but also in the Hebrew world and other places, those kind of caves were always considered to be entrances to the underworld. And so they also symbolize death. So in his hand are all the deep places of the earth. Imagine yourself going down into one of these caves. The light fails you. Maybe you have a torch, maybe you don't, but it's dark, it's dangerous. It's not the normal world. You're worried you're going to go into the underworld and die, right? Even in those places, the deep places, God is there. And the strength of the hills is his also. The word strength here means weariness. And if you want to understand that, let me tell you a story about what we did while we were in Branson. One of the hiking trips that we made was a state park, I think it was, where there were 368 steps from the top of a bluff down to the river level. And when we first got there, it was the morning. It was kind of a nice morning. We thought, sure, 368 steps, no problem. So down we go, right? And 368 steps are great when you're headed down. They're not so nice when you're headed back up, right? Because then it's harder, and it was later in the day, and it was hotter, and it darn near took me out. It was very difficult for me, and I'm out of shape for one thing, but difficult for me to get up those steps. But when I got to the top, I knew I had the strength to do it. I had conquered the thing. I had done it. And that's what this word means. It means the weariness that comes with climbing a mountain, going up to the very tops of the hills or the mountains, the weariness that comes with a good hike when you know you can get to the top and you have the strength to do it and you've accomplished something important, right? The strength of the hills is his also. And when we imagine that, we need to imagine those moments in life when we've conquered the world. We're just on the top of the world. We've done something. We've worked hard. We've accomplished something important. Everybody's giving us congratulations and pats on the back. And it's just a great time to be us. You know, everybody has those moments sometimes. And that's what we've got in this verse. The deep places of death and darkness and danger. And then the heights of the hills, the strength, the accomplishment, the good times, from the worst of the worst to the best of the best, all those times are in God's hands. Right? He's got the whole world in his hands. And that's what this verse is trying to tell us. A similar sort of thing in this next verse. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. If you don't know about the sea in the Bible, it is not a good thing. Almost always the ocean or the sea is considered a dangerous thing. Remember, the ancient Hebrews were not seafarers, particularly. They were hill people, hillbillies. Right? They lived in the hills, on the dry land. That's where they liked it. The land stayed where it was supposed to be, right? They didn't like getting out on the water where it was all up and down and they never know what could happen, right? And there was the sea made a noise. Have you ever, I hope you've been to the ocean. I hope you've been to a lake or something where you could hear the noise of the waves constantly crashing against the shore. I like that noise. I think it's nice. The ancient Hebrews didn't like it because it signified to them unpredictability, danger, worry. Right? So the word for sea here means roaring thing. It's a sound word. The roaring thing is his and he made it. Right? So even the thing that causes us worry, the thing that brings unpredictability into our lives, even the pandemics, dare we say it. Right?
How does that come up from ashamed, confused, and disappointment?
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. That's the opposite. That's the dry land. So you might think that he's drawing a contrast here between water and dryness. But I think, and this is just my, Father Thorpe's opinion, I think it's really, the sea represents worry and doubt and unpredictability. And the dry thing, the word dry actually means ashamed, confused, or disappointed. And the way that works is it starts out by meaning something that is withered or dried up. For instance, this is how all the plants look that are in my charge. If I ever get a plant, it takes it about a week to look like that. Right? My wife is good with plants. I'm no good with them. So they all get this word. They all get withered, dried up.
There you are, Nils.
From there, it goes to a person who is dried up or withered, maybe from shame or failure. If you've ever had an experience in your life where everybody was ashamed of you, or even the people that you most loved were ashamed of you for something that you did, or a failure, or something like that, right? That's what this word means. And from that, the times of life then that are dry for us, or the times where we feel like we're all withered up and we've got no life left, depression, failure, sadness, grief, shame, right? And here it's saying, in both of those times, whether it's a time of unpredictability, like the sea where it roars, or whether it's a time of dryness and shame, right? In both cases, God is squeezing, molding. Come on, zoom in on me. There it is. Oh, sorry. I'm using a touchpad. I hate touchpads. Okay. Oh, there it goes. All right. There's God. The hands of God squeezing and molding. And, to do pottery like this, it requires two things, something wet and something dry, right? And this is a pottery word that he's talking about. So I do think there's wetness and dryness playing in here, but what he's saying is that God uses these times. And they're not fun times. They're not exciting, but he uses them and he molds us in the dry time, and the sea is his and he made it. Where are we? So that's the emotion I think we're supposed to feel from this verse. God is the creator of the powerful sea, but he also gets his hands dirty with us in the dry times of our lives, and he uses them to form us and make us what he wants, just like potter with clay. So this all tells us who this God is, why he's worthy of the kind of praise that will rock the rafters and cause damage, right? Why are we coming out of our daily lives to go away and worship God? Why are we singing these songs? Where's the focus? It's this God, the God who has the depths of the deep places of the earth and the heights of the hills and the roaring of the sea and the dryness of dry times. He's got it all in his hands. So any comments on that before we move on to the next place?
No, but thanks for kind of deciphering that.
Oh, good. It's useful. It's so easy with Zoom classes to just talk and talk and talk, and I want to make sure you guys have a chance to ask questions. If you have them, please just pipe in. So then this is the response. This is what we're supposed to do. This is the how of worshiping God. And I got some things that popped in there too early. Oh well. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel facing Yahweh, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. So I don't know if you noticed, but there's this word to bow down, and it means literally to press down flat. And the idea there is to prostrate oneself before royalty or to worship. When you get ordained a priest in the Episcopal Church, one of the things you have to do is lay down flat in front of the bishop and promise to obey him. It's kind of a scary moment because bishops aren't always, you don't always feel like they deserve it, but you still make the promise, right? And it's the same thing here. To press yourself down flat is actually a pretty common way to worship God. And we see that in, and we can imagine, oh, let's look at the number of ways that this is said, right? Worship, the word worship there means to press down flat. And then after that, we have another word that means basically the same thing, bow down. And then we have another one that means basically the same thing, kneel. Right? 3 words that mean almost the same thing, to bow down, to kneel down, to show reverence, using our physical body to show reverence to Yahweh, our Maker. And if you want to know what that would look like, if a whole group of pilgrims did that, it would look like this. That's a group of Muslims worshiping, but this is actually a very ancient way to worship God. Ancient Hebrews would have done this as well. The Eastern Orthodox still do this today. Some of the monks will do prostrations, hundreds of prostrations a day, up and down, as part of their prayers. The way we hold ourselves makes a difference in how we pray. At least that's what the ancient world believed. And you can pray. I mean, you can pray sitting on your easy chair. It's as long as the attitude of your heart is proper. But what we do with our bodies changes the way we feel about things. When you smile on purpose, after a while you start to feel good. Right? And it's the same way with bowing. This is why we kneel at church, right? When you do the kneeling, there's something about it that sometimes makes you feel the way you're supposed to feel when you approach God in humility. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. I've always thought this was kind of a strange verse because it's mixed up, right? It should be the sheep of his pasture, because sheep and pasture go together. And it should be the people of his hand, because those are non-sheep metaphors, right? And my mind wants to put all the sheep metaphors together and all the non-sheep metaphors together. It should be the sheep of his pasture and the people of his hand, but it's not. It's we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. So you got to look at the words to know what that means. Both of these are talking about the group that's come together to worship him. It's a single collective, a community of individuals. It's a lot like what we're going to talk about when we do the 23rd Psalm, a group of people that all have this individual relationship with God. And in the first case, the group is being defined by animals eating together. We are the people of his pasture. The pasture is a food source, right? So here the group is being defined by we all eat together. The flock of a shepherd is basically all the animals that he takes care of that eat together. Right? And so it's defining the people of God the same way, that when we come together to worship God, we all receive spiritual nourishment from him together as a group. And that helps define who we are. But it's not the only thing, because the people, the sheep of his hand, the hand means the open hand again. This is an open hand that's ready to work, to do something, to move things. And so now the flock is defined as the group of animals that moves together. Before we were the group of animals that eats together. Now we're the group of animals that moves together. And again, this is a song they would sing as they were moving over to Jerusalem, right, to worship. So we as Christians can think of ourselves the same way. The church is defined by, we're the group of people that comes together to eat the body and drink the blood of the Lord in the sacrament, and to hear his word and to pray together. But we're also the group of people that moves together, that goes places, we do things, we do justice in the world, we help people, and we do it as a group together, because that's also how we define ourselves. 2 different ways of defining the people of God. And this is essentially what I just talked about. Imagine everybody together and moving, everybody together eating. And it brings us back to the whole idea of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. All of our shepherds we shall not want. Now the 95th Psalm makes a very interesting turn. And it seems kind of strange because the second half is so different from the first half. And this has led some people even to think that perhaps maybe they were separated originally. Maybe somebody else wrote the second half. Maybe they don't belong together. But I think they do. And I think they do because the people who are going to worship God are being realistic. They're not interested just in pretending everything's always good or everything's always happy. Far more important is actually knowing who we are and who God is. And the people of God never come before him without history. We all have a history. We have a history with our church. We have a history with our spouses and our families. We have history with each other. And that history comes with us when we go to worship God. Right? It never goes away. It can be sanctified. It can be redeemed. It can be cleansed and made to be valuable, but it doesn't go away. It's still our history, and God uses it. Right? And so the next part has to do with Israel's history, and not necessarily the savory parts, but it's a very realistic look. In fact, even a sobering look at Israel's history. So it says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your heart as in the Meribah, and as in the day of Massa in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my deeds. Now we get to God himself speaking. You notice it switches from, if you will hear his voice, it switches to the first person where God himself is speaking. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my deeds. It switches right in the middle there. So it's as if the caravan of people has reached Jerusalem, and they've done their praising, and they've done their bowing, and now God himself gets to speak. And when God speaks, we listen, because if we don't, we're hardening our hearts. Sorry, move this over. So it's asking us to hear intelligently, to hear with understanding, not just to listen to the sound as it goes in and out, but it's asking us again to hear and use the imagination to think through what's being said. Right? God's words don't just land on us like a royal decree. They're meant to give us understanding. We're not complete followers of Christ if we don't start to understand and learn how he does what he does. Right? Understanding is part of what God wants for us. And that's what this word is asking us to do. Today, if you will hear his voice and think through it and understand. And the word voice here is, just like we saw before, a natural sound, like the sheep bleating or the cow mooing. Right? This is the natural sound of God's voice. Let me zoom in on that because it's way too small. There we go. Just like the natural sound of the sheep is to baa, the natural sound of the cow is to moo, the natural sound of God's people is to praise him, the natural sound of God's voice is to call for the lost sheep. Right? Today, if you will hear his voice, come, come. Remind me of the revivalist hymn, calling those sinners, come home. Right? That's the natural sound of God, to look for the sheep that need him. Oh, this is a place where I didn't get my editing done quite right. So this is, today if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart. The word to harden your heart means to make it heavy or hard to move or hard to work with, or to be stiff, to be physically hard and stiff. And so obviously that means of people, when our hearts get stiff and hard to work and hard for God to teach anything to, then we're stubborn. The Bible's word is stiff-necked. I love that image, stiff-necked. You can't see mine because I've got a high collar, and a beard that covers it up. But to be stiff-necked, if you just sort of set your jaw and tense up your shoulders, you can feel when your neck gets stiff like that, when you're like resisting anything that's coming. That's the idea of a stubborn and stiff-necked people, right? And if we're approaching God like that, like we're just resisting what he says, that's what he's trying to avoid. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And he points to a time when that happened, when they became hard-hearted. And we won't read this whole thing. It's a long passage. You can read it yourselves. It's in Exodus chapter 17. But this is a part where the people say to Moses, give us water to drink. And Moses gets angry. And they get angry back at him. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children? And Moses gets so frustrated that this is where he sins against God. And this is why he can't go into the promised land later. Right? This is an infamous moment in the history of God's people when they screwed up and their leader Moses screwed up. And this psalm is pointing back to that. At the moment of joyous worship, it's pointing back to this moment when they all got it wrong. And they all became stubborn and stiff-necked. It's a powerful time to pull that one out and say, remember this. Don't be like that. Listen. Listen with intelligence and understanding and hear what God will say. And so for us, then, we're supposed to feel, I think, that as we go to worship, we prepare our hearts not only by remembering God's goodness, but by remembering that we need a Savior and we need to listen. And having that soft heart is just as important coming to worship as the loud praise, right? The praise that rocks the rafters and the heart that is soft should go together. And it would be great if it would stay there, but it goes on and it gets even more graphic in terms of the feelings of God here. 40 years long, I was grieved with this generation and said, again, this is God himself speaking, it is a people that are erring in their hearts. They have not known my ways, unto whom I swore in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. This is not the way I like to end a worship service. I want to end it on something upbeat and happy and encouraging and send me back out in my life to serve God. And instead it ends with a note of repentance, a calling for repentance. To be grieved with this generation it's a strong word, loathing, detesting. And the image we're supposed to get is of evil deeds continually bubbling up from their hearts. Like here's an image of, oh, there it is, come on. A mud puddle, a bubbling volcanic mud puddle. And imagine if each of these bubbles as it comes up and sort of pops is some other failure or sin or evil thing or a corruption of something good. And all this corruption just keeps bubbling up from their hearts. And you can get an idea of what God is feeling there. It's very easy to just read this part of the psalm as an angry God. Right? But it's inviting us to imagine ourselves into God's place. Again, because that's the whole method here. And imagine if the one you love and care so much for is like this bubbling pool, only it's evil stuff that keeps bubbling up. And you just wonder, where does it all come from? Why does it keep coming up? Why are we trying and trying and trying again and nothing seems to work or change? And you can imagine the feelings of exasperation or hope, but also hope strained, right? Because it keeps bubbling up. Unto whom I swore in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. The hearts that don't know my ways, I'm sorry. The ways there are the path of the road. Okay, the word swear there. No, the word for wrath, I'm sorry. The word for wrath means a flaring of the nostrils. And the best image is a bull. Because when a bull gets angry and it lowers its head, right, and it flares its nostrils and the breath comes out, that's literally what this word means. It means the bull's breath coming out of its nostrils. And anyone who's ever been a parent or tried to teach children know that sometimes we get this way. Right? And just like parents don't stay this way, we don't stay angry at our children. Sometimes we get angry, but we don't stay angry. We forgive and we go on, right? And we teach. And so God is eminently more that way. And just because he gets angry doesn't mean he stays angry. In fact, we have other Psalms that tell us his wrath lasts forever. But he doesn't like it when we sin. And it is a problem, and he has to deal with it. And we're getting close on time here, so I'm going to move forward to the ending. It ends there. It ends with them nothing. It doesn't really end. It has an undefined ending. And the thing that's left echoing in our minds is today, if you will hear his voice. We never get the end of that if then conditional, right? So we want to hear, if you hear his voice, then God will bless you. That's what we want to hear. And it doesn't happen. We just have the if part. If you will hear his voice and harden not your hearts. What will happen next? Right? And it's because the psalm wants us to imagine ourselves into not hardening our hearts. It wants us to imagine ourselves into where we need to be to receive God's blessing. And it really wants to push us away from the evil bubbling continually up from our hearts, right? It wants to warn us away from that and put us into this undefined ending where it could go anywhere, right? If we will not harden our hearts, if we listen, if we praise, who knows where the road will take us. But wherever it will be with this God. So that's where we end this Psalm 95. It's a great psalm. There's a lot in there. We could talk about it a lot longer. And we didn't even define half the words. There's just a ton of great stuff there. But I'll take us off of screen sharing and we can all see each other. Oops. I will do that. Yes, I will do that in this way. I have forgotten how to do that. I'm screen sharing. I want to unshare. Oh, there it is. Stop share. I see. Sorry. Okay. So just let's maybe take 5 or 10 minutes. Any thoughts as we're going through that? Thoughts as you look back? Something that really stuck out at you as something that was unusual or strange, or something you hadn't seen before?
I think the idea of the imagining.
Yeah.
Really
It's nice to be given.
Although we don't know the language
Right.
that you started out with, and as we see as we go along.
I think it's nice to be given permission to do that, isn't it? I mean, you have permission to imagine and to figure this out. Narni, you were saying something, but I think you were muted.
It's all right. I was just thinking that this particular psalm is one that many of us know better than maybe most of the other ones.
Right.
And it's very, very interesting to find all these layers of things that I'm familiar with and have said for decades and decades. And what I just sort of blithely recited was totally not where they were coming from when it was written.
Wow. I feel that way all the time, even with something like the Lord's Prayer or the 23rd
Mhm.
Psalm. We know them so well, and yet they still reward study. Anybody else have that same feeling as you're going through it?
Yeah, this is what I was kind of hoping to get from this, because
Good.
actually, I've never really gotten anything out of the Psalms. It was just like we would recite them and, okay, let's go on to something else. And I was hoping that we could just pick apart something and find out what's really going on there. So I do appreciate this.
Good, I'm glad.
I was talking to someone the other day about my experience with Psalms, and I'm a lot like Mike. The majority of the Psalms don't do much for me. The 23rd Psalm, yes. Psalm, I'm trying to think which one it is here. Oh, can't turn the page. But my experience was when I was growing up, when you went to school in the morning, the first thing you did was the Pledge of Allegiance. And then everybody had, one student in the class every day had to read a psalm. And we always wanted psalm number, whatever the two verse psalm was. So once you get past the 23rd psalm, which everybody knew, and the 2-verse psalm, there's a few like the one for today that I'm familiar with, but I don't have a warm fuzzy over a lot of psalms. Although I know, there's songs is how we were brought up. There were songs. So as Mike said, picking them apart, if we knew more of the language and what we were reading, then it would mean more, hopefully.
What I would love to know how they were performed. We've got very little archaeological or even textual evidence of how they were sung and the music that went on and what kind of instruments were used. We have a little bit, but I would love to have heard them singing this at the time. That would have been awesome.
Interesting thought.
Yeah.
I think that the way we were doing it under Father Ian was more of a chant.
Yeah.
And I don't get the feeling that they were really intended to be that way. I think they were really intended to be more out there. But who knows? Like you said, who knows?
Have you ever seen a Middle Eastern Anglican congregation worship?
No.
They're not just book readers, right? That's a very English cultural thing, to just read a text or to chant it. That's very English. You get the Anglican Church in Jerusalem itself or in Africa, in various places in Africa, and they've got drums and dancing and swirling around, and it's a whole different experience. And I get the feeling that the Psalms were meant for that kind of more active worship in some ways.
Father,
Go ahead,
can I
Tom.
break in just a minute? Yeah.
Sure.
This has really opened my eyes because I've always enjoyed the parables and getting into them and what they mean. Never really understanding the Psalms had the same benefit. And so you really opened my eyes tonight
Good.
to really go deeper into what the Psalms are really saying. Not just a song like Mike talked about. It's just kind of a wow. It's a wow moment, I guess I should say.
Thanks be to God. I'm glad. That's the way I feel studying them. Every psalm I look at and you dig into it. Oh, wow, I didn't know this was there.
Yeah, wow.
How were they originally divided up? I mean, why are they in the order that they're in?
Most of about the first half of them are traditionally ascribed to David. And so the Davidic Psalms tend to cluster together. And then Psalms written probably by other people. There are 12 or 15, I think, by a guy named Asaph, either by him or maybe he was the music director for him or something like that. It's kind of like, the Psalms are kind of like a church music library, right? If you go to the choir director's house and look in his file cabinets, he's got like sheaf after sheaf of sheet music. It's kind of that way, right? And it just depends on how they filed them. And in this case, they seem to have filed them under author. So all the Psalms of David tend to be towards the beginning, the first 75 or 80 Psalms. And then Psalms by other people. There's one by Moses. There's several by Solomon, and several that have no author. And so they're kind of arranged that way. They were probably first collected. That's a good question. Probably first collected in the form that we have them about 500 BC. No, that's too early. More like 300 BC. They were around before that, but they didn't get collected all into one volume before that. And so the people in Jesus' day, it was actually a relatively new thing. I mean, 300 years or so, that's relatively new compared to Abraham. But it was a relatively new thing in Jesus' day that they knew the Psalms so well and could read them all together. So if you look at the stories of Jesus' passion, the crucifixion and resurrection, he's always quoting Psalms. The Psalms are like the soundtrack to the Passion of Jesus, because he quotes 8 or 9 different Psalms along the way. And the authors quote them as well. So they were really well known and well loved early on. Yes.
It's me, Jane.
Hey.
Well, first of all, thank you. No offense for putting our daughter to sleep tonight, but we really do appreciate that. So this is also doubling as Sunday school, which we needed. So I grew up Episcopal. We did not say Psalms in school because I went to public school. I guess I've never had really a whole lot of Bible learning, if you will, but here we are. And so I've really enjoyed it as an adult, and I've learned the most, I think, by teaching children, you know, trying to break it down to their level. So thank you for doing that also. One of the more interesting things that I find is the linguistic aspect of it. So I really appreciate that you, like the illustration with shalom. I think a lot of us are more familiar with Greek and Latin roots because that's something that they teach, but you know, those words have vowels, so they're a little easier for us to understand.
There's no guesswork involved.
So with the Hebrew, I just wanted to, I know some of y'all are note takers and you'll be just like transcribing things and you'll go look at it later. When I used to teach Sunday school for high schoolers, gosh, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, there was a video series by a guy named Rob Bell. Are you familiar with him, Father?
Right, yeah.
The I think they're the Numa videos, maybe, but he did one on in these videos he would take like a common word that we're all familiar with and sort of go from there with his interpretation. And one of them that I found the most powerful was his video on breath. And you can find all of these on YouTube. They're like 10-15 minutes. But it was talking about the word Yahweh and how there wasn't really an exact translation for it.
Right.
And so that's what I thought of when you were on your first few slides there. And it really is kind of a helpful way to understand how we listen to it now. So if anyone wanted to go further on that, I would just suggest that particular video as a neat perspective. The rest of my understanding of Hebrew comes from historical fiction like The Dove Keepers and The Red Tent, if anyone has read those. So I probably haven't researched the right things, but
No,
and
that's
I guess
great.
this isn't a question or anything, but anyway,
No.
thank you. And I appreciate the breakdown with the language because that is helpful to me.
One of the things I would recommend, let me share my screen again quickly along those lines, is this YouTube channel called The Bible Project. These guys are fantastic, and it sounds a lot like what Rob Bell did.
Okay.
And they have a whole long list of videos. Some of them, like this most recent one, has to do with the concept of compassion, and they're all animated too. They've done 7 seasons. They go through all the books of the Bible. Here's one on the water of life. They do one on specific words like martyrs, witness, in the New Testament, and they're really good, and also fun and animated, which is nice. So yeah, I recommend that. And the kind of videos that you talked about with Rob Bell, those are a great way to learn more about the Hebrew words and to dig deeper.
Well, and I feel like kids can draw their own things from that too. You know, it's not just for grown-ups. So
No, that's a great point, because the Psalms should be easy to teach children. You could take any one of these verses and just sort of fire a kid's imagination about what it means and have them draw something or make a little something out of clay or, you know.
yeah, I mean, even Liza was looking at the pictures and asking questions. She like recited most of the Eucharist with Father Bose this weekend, you know, so kids really, we don't give them enough credit, I think, because they're really paying attention. So I like things that can apply to everybody.
And, you know, if it works for kids, it works for the rest of us too.
Let's hope.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. And we will do this again next Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel, for those of you who remember that. And the same link should work again next week. So hang on to the email. We'll send out another one anyway, just in case, but it's the same link and it should work all the way through the study. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing all the
Good
work.
night,
Oh, my
everybody.
pleasure. It's fun.
Yeah, we
Bye.
learned a lot.
Good.
Good night, all.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Adios.
I've now Zoom, Mom. It's just
Well,
cool.
wait, it usually says gallery and it'll show
Everybody?
everybody all around. That part wasn't there on that one for some reason.
I'll tell you what that means. I meant what I said. I